So now we are going to go in and talk about our highlights. I went in, I deepened the areas that I felt like I needed to deepen a little bit. I added a few shadows and like lines around my mouth and a little bit more in the chin, but you can really see like with the jowls, especially when you look like compared to this side of my face and how it's very, very like kind of straight. If you look over here, this really creates like a nice kind of like carved out line. So it's a little tricky, but I feel like when you do have those moments where you kind of do like step back from it, you're like, oh, okay, like this kind of makes sense. So it is really important to kind of do that every now and then, because even me who's done this kind of stuff a lot, I still have moments where I'm just like, what am I doing? Like, does this even look right? So you always do need to step back from it. So that's kind of what I've been doing. It's still a little crazy because we don't have our highlight on, but I am going to go in and place highlights. So I think a lot of times with highlight, people don't know if it should go like above or below the wrinkles or the shadows. I kind of usually tell people like to do both. And the answer is usually like yes if it goes like above or below, just because depending on the part of the face that you're on, what's like above this line is actually like below the other one, so there's not always like a definite way that it should go. And like for right here, like yes, like if this is going to be like a little bit darker, and then like if my hair is kind of like in here, then like yeah, I'm probably gonna have more highlight here than I would naturally here. But for this, like I'm going to be highlighted here and here, so it can be like a little bit of both. So I wouldn't necessarily be as like concerned about like the direction or like the exact placement of them, as long as you know that like wherever you have a shadow, you have a highlight, and vice versa, then you're going to be on the right track. So I'm going to go in again. I really love these really tiny brushes. I have like a million of them, so I'm going to use that. I'm going to use pure white, just because even on this side where it was more subtle, I had to do that. But again, you want to find the highlight shade that is correct for you, and really generally, usually that's like a couple shades lighter than what your skin tone is. But for something where you need something a little bit more dramatic with a little bit more contrast, it might be like several shades lighter. So just make sure that it's like on the same level as your shadow color. So I'm gonna go in and just know like I know right here. And again, I'm just placing everything before I worry about blending it. And so anywhere where I kind of left my skin tone is where I know I have to go in. And again, even though I just blended all those shadows, I know just by looking at this, like I'm gonna have to go back in and fix them, just because a lot of times I feel like the highlight can kind of like take over. So that's one reason that I try to like blend the two separately, just because if I blended that all together now, I just feel like the highlight would sort of like eat everything. And then for this line, this is usually one where you gotta go a little bit stronger below it than you do above it. So really I'm just finding like all my shadows. I'm kind of throwing a little bit of highlight in there. So I know I want that to pop out. And then for these, it's a little tricky, but it's generally like, it goes in like the little like notches that you created. And then it also goes in these little like rounded parts. So it's sort of like here and here and here and here. So it kind of like alternates. That's like a good way, I think, to like think about it. Again, trying to do that right now is a little bit tricky, but I think you get like the general idea of where that's supposed to go. I know that's got to be a little bit highlighted. I know I'm gonna need a little bit of highlight here, and you don't necessarily want to go in and like brighten your eye area, but there does have to be like some places where there's highlight, otherwise it's not going to read correctly. So I know I'm gonna need that. I'm gonna need just a little bit right there, and that's gonna help all of that kind of like sink in a little bit more. I think trying to figure out where to put your highlights in this area is always like the hardest part. So usually I feel like it takes me a second to kind of figure that out. And then I'm gonna put a little bit right there. And then just kind of in between all of the wrinkles that you drew in. And again, I'm just placing these. I'm not sitting and like perfectly blending them all out. I'm just trying to get the makeup on at this point. And then you can go into your little like crow's feet that you did to kind of break that area up. Usually the center of the nose, you're gonna probably have some kind of highlighting because usually the nose you've like done a little bit more with, but since we kind of did like a half and half, I don't have as much going on right there. But if you did any kind of like really intense shading other than the side, obviously you would want to do the center of the nose as well. And then just anywhere I added in those shadows, I have to go back in and add my highlight. So really, generally speaking, this is kind of everywhere that my highlights would need to be. I'm going to go in and just try to get a couple more places that are a little bit tricky, and then we are going to talk about blending them.